So if you lay down at night and your toes are just kind of flopping towards the end of the bed, your tibs are weak. A lot of people with knee issues have weak tibs.
This was the most ridiculous part.
Welcome to Jiu Physio. My name is Leon. I'm a physiotherapist who's created this channel to discuss all things related to your body's physical health, including recovering from injuries, managing chronic pain, and everything musculoskeletal health. Today we have an interesting discussion, especially about the role of health influencers online and the spread of misinformation. Today I'll be exploring a video posted by Dr. Brian Sutterer, a medical doctor specializing in sports medicine who reacts to a podcast where neuroscientist Dr. Andrew Huberman discussed the new hot exercise trend of Tibialis raises with Tim Ferriss. So today, I'll be dissecting the points that Dr. Brian Sutterer made to see whether or not they're valid or not. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Dr. Huberman is a neuroscientist, and without a doubt, he's an extremely smart person who I think has done genuinely a lot of good to help people learn and become better with their wellness, their self-care, and a lot of great things. But what often happens with a lot of these types of personalities who venture into the social media space and become very famous and well-known because of their initial area of expertise is they run out of things within their area of expertise to talk about. And so over time, you start to see them stray into other areas of science or medicine based on what's popular out there in the culture.
So I completely agree with Brian on this one. Just because someone is an expert in something doesn't make them an expert in everything. So in this case, Dr. Brian Sutterer, a sports physician who's a medical doctor and sees patients with sports musculoskeletal injuries, he has a lot more scope in talking about rehabilitation and the role it plays for someone to get back into playing sports again. So of course, Dr. Brian Sutterer obviously has more authority in the space of using exercise and rehabilitation techniques and practices to get people back to being active again. On the other hand, we have Dr. Andrew Huberman, an associate professor in ophthalmology and neuroscience. Whilst he has a lot of expertise and knowledge in these specific areas, from my understanding, he's not a medical doctor or healthcare professional, so he doesn't deal with patients who has physical injuries. And so his expertise in the area of rehabilitation will be much more limited compared to someone like Brian Sutterer.
This podcast that he was on with Tim Ferriss back in 2023 is full of absolute just nonsensical reasoning and rubbish when it comes to talking about tib raises and shin splints and flat feet and floppiness in your feet when you lay in bed. That is just complete, flawed, utter nonsense. I'm going to walk through some of these parts and just talk about where he's completely flat out wrong and just help to actually tell the truth about some of these things. We'll dive.
So I've actually watched this video earlier, and what I noticed was that Andrew Huberman overgeneralized a lot of bold statements without a lot of strong scientific evidence or having the necessary experience in working with patients with physical injuries. As a physiotherapist, I regularly see patients with physical and sports injury. So one of our main roles and scopes of practices is recommending exercise to help people rehabilitate from painful conditions as well as injuries. So whilst I'm not a doctor like these two, hopefully I can provide some insight into what these two are talking about and how valid the points both these two make.
Actually, so I'll just walk through it. I'm really big on tib raises. I warm up with tib raises. Training the
tib
front.
raises meaning like the
front,
tibialis anterior,
yeah,
like dorsiflexion, raising your toes towards your knee.
So this is a huge addition.
Great accuracy right there. Yes.
So tibialis raises refer to exercise that target tibialis anterior. This is one of the muscles located around the front of the shin. As you can see, the tib raise refers to the dorsiflexion movement where the ankle lifts away towards the knee or away from the floor. This is typically an exercise or movement that most people ignore, particularly those who are into bodybuilding and going to the gym. Unlike more aesthetically obvious muscles like your calves, quads, and delts, beefing up your tibialis anterior isn't most people's priority. In fact, unlike other machines in the gym, I've actually never seen a specific piece of equipment that is dedicated towards strengthening tibialis raises in the gyms I go to. I myself as a physiotherapist typically reserve these type of exercises for helping rehabilitate injuries like shin splints or sprains.
I warm up with tib work. Why? Training my tibs, as they're called, has
tibs of the new biceps.
Tibs of the new definitely makes the calf work more effective.
Mm-hmm.
So this statement made by Andrew Huberman is a bit of an odd statement to make. To put things into context, for most muscles in our body, there is the antagonist muscle, which performs the opposite movement to the muscle that's actually being activated. So for the tricep, which extends the elbow, we have the bicep that flexes the elbow. In the context of this discussion, your calf muscle that helps plantar flex your ankle, the antagonist muscle, which is the tibialis anterior, helps dorsiflex the ankle. When you train a specific muscle, your antagonist muscle should actually relax. So for instance, if you're doing a calf raise, you expect the tibialis anterior to be relaxed, or else it will be directly opposing that movement. In the conventional weightlifting or bodybuilding sense, you wouldn't train your biceps to make your triceps stronger or bigger. You just work on the exercise that target the triceps, like a skull crush or cable push downs. This statement of warming up with tib work for more effective calf workout really doesn't make sense to me. I mean, if you're trying to target your triceps, you wouldn't say, hey, let's work my biceps as a warm-up. It just really doesn't make sense to me.
Never could grow calves or get my calves strong, gotten them substantially bigger and stronger by training tibs, but more importantly, perhaps.
So this is something you hear a lot, and I think that's part of why these tib raises have become like the new hot thing.
In my opinion, that's a bit of baloney. Once again, if you want to strengthen a specific muscle group, you'd actually spend more time strengthening the actual muscle, not working the opposing muscle. While working on the tibialis anterior might help with general ankle health and control for overall movement, I don't see any compelling rationale or evidence that it'll strengthen or even grow your calf. But please, I am open to research if any of my viewers can find any information about targeting the antagonist muscle to help strengthen up the muscle that you actually want to work on. I would love to see that research, but I don't think you'll be able to find that, to be honest. I've tried looking myself.
In the social media kind of fitness influencer world, is that, of course, everybody wants big calves, right? That video is going to take off if you can talk about, the secret to getting big calves. And so presenting tib raises as something to get bigger calves is a very easy way to make people want to do it and to kind of latch on to this newfound secret in medicine that nobody has known about. But there is no real even logic behind that, because when you're doing...
Bingo. Training for hypertrophy or gaining muscle is very different from training for performance, which is what I think Dr. Huberman is failing to convey in this conversation. Rather focusing on hypertrophy and strength, when, in my opinion, the value of tib raise should be for overall movement, rehabilitation, and improving the movement of your ankle for overall performance, like pursuing athletic endeavors or performing at a high level at any particular sports.
Simply going in and doing tibialis anterior raises is not going to magically unlock your gastroc into becoming stronger. It could very well help with some pain you might be dealing with. We'll talk about shin splints in a little bit. So I think there is some true good times to strengthen your tib, but it's not this matter of fact, like he's stating here, that, it's the secret. It's the secret to unlocking your calf strengthening. That's just a way to get people to buy in, to make it feel like you are an expert and know what you're talking about.
Exactly. Exercises that dorsiflex or activate the tibialis anterior hasn't been a secret. In fact, it's been around for a very long time, particularly in a rehabilitation setting, where we'll be focusing on physical performance and injury management. Later on in this video, we'll be discussing on how tibialis anterior raises are useful in certain contexts, but not the end or be all for all situations and circumstances.
But more importantly, perhaps, helps posture, got rid of my right side sciatica. I always had this right side kind of leaning in pain, and I can...
Again, there's just no logical even theory for why strengthening a muscle that only crosses your ankle joint is going to fix people's posture.
So clearly, Dr. Brian Sutterer disagrees about tibialis raises in helping sciatica, a type of lower back symptom that leads to shooting pain down both or either legs. And to be honest, I disagree with that somewhat. For me anyways, although I find that it's uncommon that a single exercise targeting a joint away from the injury site is enough to fix the problem, I can and will explain the science behind the potential science rationale about how Dr. Huberman could actually be onto something.
There's just no even biomechanical theory or basis, certainly no fundamental research, right? Dr. Huberman likes to share and talk about the importance of evidence. There's zero evidence out there to support any of that.
So here's why I disagree with Brian. The science of exercise rehabilitation and physiology is considered more of a soft science. So unlike your chemistry or physics fields where science is more black and white, physical and exercise therapy is a little bit more gray. Even then, I have two potential theories that back up how incorporating tib raises might actually help with your lower back issues and problems. My first theory is based around what we call neuromobilizations. These are a type of rehabilitation movements that help stretch and relieve pressure away from your nerves. Although how neuromobilizations exactly works is still under investigation, for sciatica, there is a specific movement called a sciatic nerve floss or a sciatic nerve glider that can help relieve sciatica symptoms. In fact, a systematic review and a meta-analysis by Basson and her team found that performing these type of exercises, which incorporates the action of a tib raise or ankle dorsiflexion, significantly improved nerve-related low back conditions such as sciatica. A forest plot taken from the systematic review showed that the effect size of performing these type of exercises was 1.78, meaning that on a scale from 0 to 10, when you rate your pain, performing these exercises on average help reduce pain by 1.78. So by no means is this going to eliminate your sciatica, but it can definitely help with pain. Although something to keep in mind is that these sciatic gliders and flossing exercises are performed in a very specific way, which involve more than just dorsiflexion of the ankle. Other movements that also accompany it include movements from our neck and knee, and not just the action from the ankle. The second theory is based around what we call an anatomic sling. This is a theory that suggests that your muscles and fascia work in groups called slings rather than the action of individual muscles working together to produce a singular or a series of movements. So any dysfunction in the muscle along this chain can have a trickle up or trickle down effect along the whole sling. Take the deep longitudinal sling. You can see the muscles from your lower back that extend into the hamstring and down into the tibialis anterior. These muscles are commonly linked together when you're moving forward. Improper muscle activity in the tibialis anterior can cause pain dysfunction up into the lower back. In that regard, Dr. Andrew Huberman doing tib raises can help improve the movement throughout the sling and consequently assist with helping the lower back. It's important to understand that the concept of anatomic slings is based more around the anecdotal experience of clinicians rather than research-based theory. As a physio, I sometimes use anatomic slings to help my patients rehab, but rarely do I rely on one specific exercise to cure a whole condition. I find that it's more effective recommending multiple exercises along the whole sling rather than just one isolated exercises. In the context of the deep longitudinal sling, you might be also recommending hamstring and perineal exercise on top of the tib raises as well.
The other part here with Huberman that you have to remember is he is doing all kinds of other things in the meantime. He's doing more general strengthening. He talks about the squats he's doing. He's doing a lot of other exercises that are good for sciatica, that are good for posture. It's not just the tib raises that he's doing that are fixing his sciatica, but when this stuff is presented to a casual audience, they think that I have sciatica. If I start doing tib raises, I'm going to get better, when in reality, it's multifactorial.
I totally agree with Brian's point here. With Huberman's oversimplification, any listener could interpret his statement as doing tib raises is going to fix lower back pain. As a physiotherapist who has helped many people overcome their lower back conditions, I can assure you that this is definitely not the case. Lower back pain and sciatica has many factors, including your bony anatomy, the presence of any inflammatory disorders, posture, and muscular imbalance. One isolation exercise for the vast majority of the population is simply not going to cut it.
He's doing, it's the core strengthening, it's the exercise, it's the diet, it's the whole body fitness that's helping fix his sciatica and his posture and whatever this vague, non-specific, thing that people can probably relate to of, oh yeah, my right side's off. And so there's a really, really important caveat that we understand when you're talking about musculoskeletal medicine, that Huberman here, again, because you're not an expert, you're not really trained in this stuff, you don't communicate that across.
As I mentioned before, it's definitely a bit of a stretch to suggest that any one specific exercise is going to fix your lower back pain, especially if you're doing other things like squats and other potential corrective exercises. Once again, I agree with Dr. Sutterer that listeners should always defer to specific solutions for specific problems. My recommendation is you need to leave your musculoskeletal problems to professionals such as sports doctors, orthopedic surgeons, rheumatologists, and perhaps even physiotherapists instead.
we'll avoid jargon here, bring your toe closer to the kneecap as you generate your stride, not having the floppy feet. So if you lay down at night and your toes are just kind of flopping towards the end of the bed, your tibs are weak. A lot of people with knee issues have weak tibs.
This was the most ridiculous part of this whole conversation.
Yeah, that was pretty ridiculous. I'm not a sleep expert by any means, but I imagine that you'd want your muscles to be pretty relaxed when you sleep. By that logic, if your arms are completely straight when you sleep, that means your biceps are weak. Doesn't really make sense to me whatsoever.
Your feet are supposed to naturally relax when you lay down like that. It's good. In fact, if your muscles didn't relax, if you laid in bed and your feet were just rigid like this, that would mean you have abnormal spasticity in your lower leg that you need to see a doctor for.
Exactly. If your muscles are rigid and spastic when you sleep, you actually might have major issues like traumatic brain injury or a spinal cord injury. So if you are sleeping like a soldier, probably not the best thing.
A lot of people with knee issues have weak tibs.
Again, another just a generic statement.
Interesting statement by Andrew Huberman. I mean, he's probably right in the regard that most people probably don't train the tibialis anterior with or without knee pain. His statement here could be misinterpreted as many people with knee pain is caused by weak tibialis anteriors, which I assure you is not the case. From what I've gathered, there's certainly no evidence to prove that the majority, if any, of people's knee pain are exclusively tied to weak tibialis anteriors.
Someone says, oh yeah, my knee hurts, I must have weak tibs, when in reality, you might have a meniscus tear or a focal cartilage injury or pesanserine bursitis or hamstring tendonitis or a whole host of other things that strengthening your tibialis anterior might actually be the wrong thing to do.
Well, hold on.
Exactly. There are so many causes of knee pain. It's too broad to generalize that one specific exercise will fix your knee pain. For example, something like patellar tendinopathy, you're probably better off spending more time performing quadriceps isometrics in the early phases rather than focusing all your energy on tibialis anterior strengthening. Or, for example, focusing on hip stability work and thigh strength for patellofemoral pain syndrome. Look, tibialis anterior work may help, but for these types of conditions and many other types of injury conditions, you'll be stepping over dollars for pennies if other more priority rehab exercises aren't being performed.
Someone says, oh yeah, my knee hurts, I must have weak tibs, when in reality, you might have a meniscus tear or a focal cartilage injury or pesanserine bursitis or hamstring tendonitis or a whole host of other things that strengthening your tibialis anterior might actually be the wrong thing to do.
Well, hold on.
Once again, this seems pretty ridiculous to me. I'm not a sleep expert, but I presume you'd rather be flaccid when you're sleeping rather than being rigid and sleeping like a soldier. So pretty bizarre statement to make.
You know, Ben cued people to this. Tib work, okay, tib work is great for the calves. It's great for the knee. It's great for the hip. That's all very clear. And I think just a lot of people have overtrained their calves and not balanced it out with tib work. It would be like doing a lot of bicep work and not a lot of tricep work.
Yep.
This is the part where I'd partly agree with Andrew to some extent. Compared to other major muscle groups that attach into the ankle, the calf is probably the most overtrained. For overall ankle health, it's probably worthwhile strengthening all your other muscles around your ankle, not just your calf, including your tibialis anterior, your ankle everters, and your ankle inverters.
Or a lot of quad work, not a lot of hamstring work. So you have to work both sides of the limb. And I think our friend Kelly Starrett would agree.
I'm sure it would, yeah.
Tib work has changed everything for me. Posturally, I have no pain any longer.
I just want to lodge.
Again, this has nothing to do with you. You have been doing so many other things to help your pain. And so to say tib work, it's the golden goose here. I don't have pain. I don't believe it. I'm not buying it.
So from my years as practicing as a physiotherapist, it's really rare for me to see one single isolation exercise fix so many problems. Usually, most musculoskeletal problems are multifactorial and boil down to multiple solutions targeting several issues, such as amending your training program and changing certain lifestyle habits. Typically, when someone suggests you a one-size-fits-all solution, I become a little bit skeptical.
Ankle's been broken so many times that it's a little crunchy, but the point of all of that is that my ankle mobility is pretty good. My dorsiflexion strength seems pretty good, but I always feel like the front of my shins are about to explode. Someone could just pop them like a balloon with a pin. And I've not figured out a way to address this.
Yeah, I vote tib work. I used to have terrible shin splints.
Okay.
Yeah, terrible shin splints and also.
This is another thing that you see pretty often on these types of podcasts, is this generalization of assuming what somebody has as a diagnosis. What Tim is explaining here sounds like textbook chronic exertional compartment syndrome. So this feeling of pressure where you feel like the muscle is going to explode, that is not classic what we hear for shin splints. It sounds like he's describing exertional compartment syndrome.
There are a couple of issues here which Brian has picked up. The first problem is assuming someone's diagnosis based on the location of the symptoms. So immediately when Tim brings up that he's experiencing shin pain, Andrew implies that it's shin splints. Andrew ignores crucial pieces of evidence that is needed to make a diagnosis, like what the symptoms are, pressure building in front of the shin, what aggravates it, and when he knows the symptoms. So many other differential diagnoses for shin pain, including referred pain, also known as radiculopathy, stress fractures, and as Brian mentioned, exertional compartment syndrome, which it sounds like he has actually. And the second thing that Andrew immediately jumped into is providing a one-size-fits-all solution to shin splints, which is apparently tibialis and tib raises. Even if Tim has shin splints, tib raises are definitely not the only or even the best exercise to do. These are definitely assumptions which he shouldn't be making, especially with such a broad-reaching platform and the fact that he's not a musculoskeletal expert like Brian Sutterer is.
And in those cases, if you have compartment syndrome, exercising your tibialis anterior is the worst thing you could do. In fact, in those patients who have anterior compartment exertional compartment syndrome, we encourage them to start developing more forefoot running, more forefoot stride, because when you run on your heel, you require more anterior tibialis work to control that dorsiflexion, to control that descent of the foot. And so if Tim actually has exertional compartment syndrome, which it sounds like he might, Huberman telling him to do tib raises is the worst thing for him to do.
This is why specialized problems require consultations from specialists like Brian, who's a sports physician. Listening to advice that doesn't help you at all is one problem, but listening to advice that could make your problem even more harmful is worse. Unfortunately, I'm seeing this more and more in my clinics these days. My advice, go to a health professional who is specialized in the field that your problems reside in. Would you go to a doctor for a tooth problem? No, go to a dentist. A musculoskeletal problem should be seen by healthcare professionals in the field, like sports physicians, orthopedic specialists, and for more of a conservative approach, physiotherapists.
Also pain in my shins just from skateboarding, taking so many shins.
These kind of fitness gurus, everybody always has shin splints, right? They all have shin splints. They all have sciatica. They all have posture problems.
Before diving into this section, it's important to understand that Huberman didn't specifically mention shin splints and just shin pain. Dr. Sutterer is right in saying that too many people attribute shin pain to shin splints. And as I mentioned before, there is a huge number of conditions that can actually cause shin pain, like radiculopathies or exertional compartment syndromes and even stress fractures. With a paper from a physiotherapist and researcher, Marinas Winters, I'll show you how you can diagnose shin splints quite reliably with just answering 6 questions. Question number 1, do you experience pain along the distal 2/3 of the medial shin? Question number 2, is the pain worse after and during activities but better with rest? Question number 3, do you get cramping or burning around the posterior aspect of the leg? Question number 4, do you have any numbness or pins and needles in the foot? Question number 5, can you reproduce the pain by palpating along the posterior medial tibial border, which spans around or more than 5 centimeters? Question number 6, do you have any other uncharacteristic symptoms like swelling or redness around the shin? Now, if you answer these yes or no questions in this order, there is a good chance that you have shin splints.
I used to think I had flat feet. Thought I have flat feet. That's the source of my problem. And I'd do all this toe strengthening, foot strengthening stuff. All these people in the yoga community.
Another thing that a lot of these people tend to have, right? Flat feet. Another one. We've hit them all. We've hit flat feet, sciatica, shin splints.
There's actually some validity with people having flatter feet and having a higher risk of developing shin splints. One test that we use to quantify flat feet, or what we call overpronation, is the navicular drop test. And we do this by looking at a landmark called the navicular tuberosity and identify its position in a neutral and then relaxed position. In a systematic review by Hampshire Wright and his team, they found that physically active individuals with shin splints on average had a significantly lower navicular arch by 1.19 millimeters. This means that those who had shin splints were more likely to have pronated or flat feet. In another systematic review and meta-analysis by Newman and his team, they found that those with more significant pronation of the feet had almost 2 times the risk of developing shin splints. In essence, what the research seems to show is that those with more pronated or flat feet are more likely to have shin splints. And this is consistent with what Andrew Huberman is saying. Whether or not correcting flat feet will help with shin splints is a completely different story though.
I don't have flat feet. It turns out that my tibs were weak. And so the foot wasn't resting in the right position. So for me, it's been a game changer. Also, you don't need any specialized equipment.
At the end of the day, Tib Raises can help with shin splints, but it isn't a game changer by any means. While strengthening the tibialis anterior can in theory help reduce navicular drop due to its pull on specific bones in the foot, it doesn't address the specific reasons why you may have shin splints in the first place, including your training program and hip mobility. To be quite honest, the biggest game changer for shin splints is simply by changing your training program and temporarily reducing back your training volume instead.
Equipment, there is
more absolute nonsense. So yes, one of the tibialis muscles helps to influence the shape of the foot in the arch support. But it's not the tibialis anterior, it's the tibialis posterior.
Once again, I agree with Brian Sutterer. The muscle that has more important role in controlling the medial arch of your foot is in fact the tibialis posterior and not the tibialis anterior. As you can see in this illustration, the tibialis posterior runs along the inner part of the leg and then along the inner part of the foot's arch. Now, looseness and weakness in this tendon is one of, if not the most common reason for flat feet in adults. So it's important to strengthen this muscle if you notice flat feet and have shin splints at the same time. So in fact, it's actually more important to strengthen up your tibialis posterior rather than tibialis anterior if you've got flat feet and you have shin splints as well. The way you strengthen up your tibialis posterior can be done by resting the foot on the ground and then inverting your foot inwards. The most common mistake I see is people overcompensate by rotating the hips and knees as well. Make sure to use the foot and ankle only. To progress, you can add a resistance band to continue tightening and strengthening up the tibialis posterior. So in conclusion, what do I think of the discussion? I believe that being an expert in one field doesn't make you an expert in other areas. For musculoskeletal issues, I would always refer to an expert in the field like a sports physician, orthopedic specialist, or a rehab therapist like a physiotherapist. While Huberman did bring up valid points like the association between flat feet and shin splints and the utility of tib raises in a rehab environment, he grossly exaggerated how one golden exercise can fix everything. As a physiotherapist who has seen over 1,000 patients, I know that everybody has their unique situations and responds differently to various exercises. Even if you have shin splints, I find that exercises that also target the calves and hips are equally, if not more important than doing a tib raises. Brian, being a sports physician who actually sees musculoskeletal patients with sports injuries, understands that tib raises isn't the be-all or end-all exercise to fix everything. There is so much more nuance than that, and while rightly skeptical, he did also disagree on some valid points that Huberman made. Overall, I think Huberman's done a great service to the health community, but I think he's missed the mark on this one. Now, what does make sense to me is that if you like what we're doing with the channel and you're enjoying this video right now, please click the like and subscribe button to continue supporting this channel. That way we can create more free content about ways to optimize your musculoskeletal health, overcome injuries, and manage chronic pain conditions.